If you had to describe Ghostwire Tokyo in one word, what would it be? Well, if you ask designer Suguro Murakashi of Silent Hill 2, 4, and Metal Gear Solid 4 fame, he'd tell you in his chocolatey baritone that it's a bit like strawberry shortcake.
いちごのショートケーキですね。
その心は
Strawberry Shortcake was designed from the Hinamaru Rising Sun design. It is truly Japanese, in a Japanese studio and a game set in Japan. It's a game where everyone can find something to love, with some sweet and tangy parts, just like Strawberry Shortcake.
イメージです。
はい。じゃあ
If you didn't quite get that delicious strawberry shortcake analogy either, then perhaps Far Cry Ghostbusters in Japan sounds good to you. Well, it certainly sounded good to me back in 2019 when Ghostwire Tokyo was first announced at Bethesda's E3 showcase. Strawberry shortcake denier and producer Shinji Mikami himself even came out to flex his English skills I never knew he had just to promote this new IP.
I am excited to announce the next game from Tango, Ghostwire Tokyo.
Then Ikumi Nakamura stole the show with her adorable awkwardness and her infectious energy.
Wow, thank you. ありがとうございます。
I was sold. The game looked different, exciting, and had a real Japanese authenticity to it that we hadn't yet seen from Tango and their excellent Evil Within games. But 3 years later, Ghostwire Tokyo would drop on the PlayStation 4 to middling reviews, and by the time its exclusivity deal with Sony expired and it came to Game Pass in 2023, the game had already become a critical and financial footnote. And then tragically, in May 2024, Microsoft would shut the studio down, and when they were bought up later by PUBG publisher Krafton, only their Hi-Fi Rush IP came with them, leaving The Evil Within and Ghostwire Tokyo in the back rooms of Microsoft, ensuring a relatively uncertain future for any forthcoming sequels. And that's too bad because Ghostwire Tokyo, while perhaps Tango's most undercooked IP, is arguably also their most unique, their most authentically Japanese. It's also one of their most touching games. I replayed this game recently at a time when that really mattered to my personal life. And so I'm here now to tell you that despite all of its flaws, Ghostwire Tokyo can be a pretty special little game. But it almost never existed. Or more accurately, it almost existed as The Evil Within 3. The pitch originally started out in Northern Europe, somewhere very cold until it eventually was set in Japan, and then it gradually turned into a love letter to the city of Tokyo where Tango lived and worked. This direction was spearheaded by co-director Ikumi Nakamura, who said,
I wanted people from all over the world to think about how cool Asian urban cities are. I was like, finally, I can make a video game that can express my vision that way.
Unfortunately, the stress of having to appease the Bethesda higher-ups over the years of making the Evil Within games had started inducing consistent nightmares for her, and her health became very poor. So poor, in fact, that she deemed it best to move on from Ghostwire and Tango altogether and take care of herself. So her co-director Kenji Kimura stepped in with aplomb, backed with Mikami's deep and abiding love of this project from its inception. And despite suffering a big loss in Nakamura, Tokyo would eventually get its love letter, come hell or ghost invasion. But Tango wasn't done playing the development game on hard mode. Tango was so dead set on replicating Tokyo realistically that construction of the city in a digital space took priority over even gameplay considerations. Producer Masato Kimura admitted to ComingSoon.net that
you normally make the gameplay along with the city or the map, so the gameplay always fits the city you're making. Since we created the city first and had to craft the gameplay onto it, we had a lot of trial and error. The number of iterations it took to get it right is what took a lot of time.
4.5 years, in fact, making it the longest production cycle of any game they'd made to date. Kenji Kimura told GG Talks that he and the team, quote,
took a lot of walks around the city to rediscover what was cool about Tokyo. There are a lot of things we knew, but we didn't really pick up on because it's just so daily in our lives. But by doing this exercise, we were able to see what was peculiar and what was interesting or intriguing about the city. It wasn't enough for the developers to include Tokyo's most well-known monuments and locales. We also wanted to include spots that only residents would know about. The types of sites that give gamers goosebumps.
Boy did they ever. While there's some fictional flourishes in Ghostwire like the Kagiri observation deck, generally speaking there's a very to-scale representation of most of Tokyo here. Numerous videos have been made showcasing all the places in-game that you can find in real life. Fellow content creator and Japanese resident Arkham666 noted that the map is pretty accurate to Tokyo, and locals he's spoken with that live there also confirmed that they've been able to find quite a few of the game's locations in real life. Another fellow Japanese resident that you've probably heard of before is Jared from Avalanche Reviews, who told me that everything from how the streets look in the rain down to the type of trash you see is very authentic. Long story short, locals rate Ghostwire Tokyo as a 10 out of 10 would recommend replica of the hustling, bustling, and strangely anachronistic place full of modernity, but also ancient customs and history that is Tokyo. You might say it's the perfect place for a ghost invasion to happen. You know, like not saying it should, but like if it had to. But while faithfulness to Tokyo's topography was top priority, you know the developers of The Evil Within were going to make it freaky eventually. No theater music, meaning NOH, not none, inspired the game's soundtrack, and Ghostwire's villain wears a traditional no-theater Hanya mask. Other influences on Ghostwire were old manga like Tokyo Babylon, but more obviously X by Clamp, such as its prominent use of moon imagery, umbrellas, and Tokyo Tower. More classically, game director Kenji Kimura got his bookworm on and said Goethe's Faust about the classic deal with the devil, Connie Willis's Passage, which is about near-death experiences as experienced by those revived from clinical death, and Hideaki Sina's Brain Valley, though Mikami notably says he doesn't read much and has no idea what Kimura is talking about.
ですけど
Oh, Mikami, go eat some strawberry shortcake and play that Moonlight Sonata you're so fond of.
あれちょっと社内いじめじゃないのあれ
Solaris was even said to be an influence, though I couldn't supply you with a single similarity between the two if you put a gun to my head. Point being, unlike the Evil Within games, which were almost exclusively inspired by horror manga and American genre films, Ghostwire had a much more classical and culturally Japanese inspiration base, and it shows. Ghostwire wastes no time in getting us immersed in its weird world. Our story starts with a supernatural fog rolling over Tokyo's Shibuya district, rapturing every inhabitant away as part of the plan of a powerful mystic in a Hanya mask who wishes to break open the underworld using, I guess, the power of their souls or something, so he can retrieve the souls of his wife and daughter from down below. This attack kills a young man named Akito, who is on his way to visit his comatose sister named Mari, an idea likely inspired by the Passage book that Kimura mentioned. But Akito is given new life when the spirit of a paranormal investigator named KK possesses Akito's body, somehow keeping him tethered to this world and granting him the ability to control 3 types of ethereal energy: wind, water, and fire. KK's a ghost hunter, and dead set on taking down the man in the Hanya mask, as he's called in the subtitles, until he's just not. The game just gives up at one point and is like, you know what, fuck it, we'll just call him Hanya. KK wants to take the fight straight to Hanya, but Akito wants to make sure Mari's safe, and unfortunately their goals align when Hanya captures Mari because of her especially strong and willful spirit, resting on the edge of death but refusing to give in. This makes her the perfect catalyst to basically power his ritual to open up the underworld. Akito and KK must battle through Hanya's army of evil spirits called Visitors and his mini-boss cohorts to retrieve the souls of Mari and the rest of Shibuya before it's too late. Okay, so that's the sitch. So let's get down to how Tango dressed up this world and how it feels to traverse and fight through. Graphically, Ghostwire is a treat. While texture pop-in still occurs in some cutscenes like it did in the first 2 Evil Withins, the open world is largely devoid of these problems, despite being a chunky 2,200 different map pieces that are slotted in and out as you traverse the world, which programmer Tsuyoshi Akagua said was a bit of a bottleneck. Still, for all the years it took to perfect this world, I think it looks and performs admirably. The titular city is coated in an evocative dark film grain, shrouded in mystic blue fog. The most peculiar rain tends to break out too. Apparently Tango's mad lad idea was to make the rain droplets in the shape of the kanji for rain, which you can totally see to be the case if you stop and stare. I love the creativity here, and it grants the world an even more surreal feeling. And no matter how many people complain that the rain looked weird, Ghostwire still has way better rain than Alan Wake 2. And that's after like 10 patches. So, you know, there's that. But even more important than the rain are those reflections. Oh my lordy. Even being a console peasant, these reflections elevate the visual mood tenfold. There's such a palpable wetness and slickness to the city, and in tandem with the lighting which Tango's always been masters of, it just looks slick. Surreal is kind of Ghostwire's bread and butter though, and that seemed to start a bit with Akumi Nakamura. When she left Tango and got herself into a better state of health, she went and started her own studio called Unseen Studios, and she noted that she'd been wanting to make a game that wasn't a survival horror game, to get into something a little lighter. Ghostwire feels like the game that was a bit of a gateway towards achieving that goal. Ghostwire isn't a horror game per se, although sometimes it is.
Spooky.
It's more wacky and eerie. The come-and-go rain contributes to this sense of eeriness, but so does the total lack of NPCs outside of the ghost hovering around the city that give you tasks. Some are just there to be rescued by you and then sent to the afterlife, and others are stuck here and need you to help them out by solving simple side missions. Ghostwire can be an intensely solemn and lonely game otherwise, though. Enemies aren't that widespread, and the music really only kicks on in scripted scenes or battle, so you just have these industrial spaces with very little actual hustle and bustle. It's as if Tokyo's been taken over by the past, and it's a haunting but not truly horrific place. It's unsettling and unnatural, but strangely serene. It even gets a bit wacky. When you turn the corner and run into a little doggo who will go find you some treasure if you give him a treat, or you go to a street shop and find that a mystical floating cat is the cashier, you just have to smile. Why are these things happening? It's never necessary to explain, because it just intuitively feels like something that could or should happen as old magic takes over the city, and learning its rules is the only way to save Tokyo from its current predicament. You can also reference statues around the city to level up your abilities, and purging corrupted torii gates unfogs the map like you'd see in almost every Ubisoft clone. But my favorite little immersive, flavorful mechanic is collecting spirits, so you can set them free in the afterlife, which consists of you waving around your paper katashiro to gather them up, and then depositing them into a very alien, isolation-looking payphone. This little mechanic is the perfect marriage of modern and ancient, of technology and magic. But notably, while you can grab a lot of these spirits off the ground, quite a few more will be up high, and getting to them is one of the most fun parts of Ghostwire. But figuring out where things are and where you want to go is spearheaded by your spectral vision, which reveals weak points or invisible enemies, but also points out enemy locations, where spirits are, and where deposits of ether are to break open for ammo. But once you get your bearings and know where to go, going is where the going gets good. Getting around Tokyo is kind of like Far Cry on steroids, so almost any building you can see is totally scalable, much like towers in, say, Far Cry 3. Some buildings may have a ladder you can climb up or a series of lifts, and many require you to platform between these various types of ascent technology, I guess. But don't think you'll just be jumping. Akito can jump and hang glide his way around for a limited time, which is not only exhilarating to perform, but managing your flight becomes a fun game of strategy when trying to find the Goldilocks path up the side of a building so you can get some spirits you want to free. Combining this ability with a very liberal grabbing hitbox that'll mantle you up and over a ledge even if you lose momentum and kind of run into right beneath it makes the platforming fun, although occasionally you'll fall all the way back to the earth just because you didn't grab something and not really quite know why it worked every other time. But once you've completed all the side missions in the story, there are so many spirits to collect that you can basically play this little game of obstacle coursing around for another, 15 hours or so, just collecting all the crap in the environment and just having to figure out all the light environmental puzzles all over the place. But when you're not flying around the city or combing through trash cans and back alleys for spirits and money to buy new stuff, you're playing Ninja Ghostbusters and blasting evil spirits back to the Shadow Realm. The most obvious difference between Ghostwire's gameplay and Tango's previous work, though, is the first-person perspective. But Tango seemed to have been angling towards this design for some time. The Evil Within 2 had several cutscenes that showed things from Sebastian's perspective, and there's a first-person segment in the sewers to simulate the limited peripheral visibility that you would have while wearing a gas mask. Tango even later added a first-person mode so you can play the whole thing from start to finish, while playing it like any other first-person shooter. So clearly Tango was angling towards this perspective, or at least testing out how they felt about it. And I gotta say, they capitalized on this perspective from a style standpoint, even if mechanically they still have a lot of work to do. Combat director Shinichiro Hara was one of, if not the primary architect of Doom 2016's glory kill system and the push-forward combat ideology. He brings his expertise here to Ghostwire and builds the combat around making the player feel like a martial arts master, using the stylish kujikiri hand gestures which represent the 9 syllables of various Taoist ritual chants and prayers. ComingSoon.net reveals that the team realized early on that shooting spirits with a gun would look silly, and they found the more believable, interesting answer to what combat would feel like in Japanese theater.
We want the player to feel like a badass, a spellcasting, high-tech ninja exorcist, defeating countless evil spirits. In order to achieve this, we chose intricate and deliberate hand gestures as the primary weapons, instead of simple guns. Unlike guns, our gestures allow us to put a lot more movement and personality into the player action, as the player's hands are organic extensions of the character.
Hara also transliterated his glory kill system into Ghostwire, as once enemies are damaged enough, glowing cores within them are exposed, and they can be finished off with a takedown move that leaves Akito vulnerable while holding down the button to perform it, but which takes care of the enemy for good once completed. All of this stuff looks really good and is accompanied by some really punchy, distinctive sound design that makes you feel like you're just tearing through dudes. The wire snaking into the visitors' bodies as you rip out their core for a kill, or when you're sneaking up behind them to pull this off, feels sensational, as does the wire inability, which sends out a shockwave that knocks visitors into or close to a weakened state, so you can rip out multiple cores at once. Your means of attack are broken down into 3 ammo types, essentially, or 3 guns if we're being really honest. Ghostwire is still a shooter in the same way that Catacomb 3D is. You may have a different model than a gun that you're shooting from, but you're still shooting projectiles and precise aiming is required. You get a standard kind of rifle or pistol single shot wind ability that can be charged up and released to fire like a machine gun, which is pretty handy, or you can shoot the rocket launcher like Fire Ether, whose charge attack is a flamethrower. Or my favorite, the short-range, high-damage water blast, which acts as the shotgun equivalent. It's secretly the best one in the game, as its ammo cap is the second highest of the 3, and it can hit multiple enemies at once, and tight. It's got a slow-down ice ability, which is the least interesting charge effect, but it does the Lord's work with its basic attack. As usual, shotguns are best guns. You're given the ability to tune aiming these various ammo types with a free aim, or you can use a built-in aim assist, which just sort of focuses your blast near enemies. You can block and parry with a perfect block, which feels great, and is the real determiner between the combat feeling bad or not. The game improved its balancing even more when it patched in a dodge move too. Feedback and sound effects are just stellar, as the hand motions really sell the feeling that you're moving mountains and doing mystical, weird, powerful things. But often the combat feels best when the enemies are just not able to crowd you or are unable to escape your auto-aim blasts. When they're given a lot of space to maneuver around and they can attack you from multiple different angles, you'll often have a little bit of trouble tracking them down and making sure that your shots don't miss left and right. Tango's first-person game is laudable in its intent, but its execution isn't incredible. The aiming controls are honestly terrible on controller. This is not just on Xbox either, as there are many complaints from PS5 users from the first year that it was a timed exclusive. I've really just never played a console FPS that controlled this badly out of the box, and was this hard to tune once you were in game. The camera acceleration just never feels right, and had to settle on a fairly stiff with an occasional crazy wobble to it that was manageable, and that was the best it ever got after adjusting my settings about 20 times in the opening hours. This finickiness is made even more obnoxious when shooting flying enemies that often flit around faster than you can track them. Don't even get me started on the Sanguine Dancer, which is not only impervious to most attacks as it pinwheels around, but is just monstrously hard to get a beat on. Even the Far Cry-like bow you get doesn't help much, as it's really just best served at one-shotting weak enemies or shooting weak spots on corrupted areas to let you move forward. I also wish the game pushed you around with different types of scenarios more. Every now and again the game will do things like separating Akito and KK so that you can only have your bow and your ability to tear out cores while sneak attacking. These potentially inspired disempowerment sections amount to KK being sucked out of you having to dodge a little bit, get close, reel his spirit back into you, and problem solved, you've got all your abilities back. It's just a missed opportunity to differentiate the encounters one from the other, or to add more drama and more layers and more depth to combat. Overall, while the Sanguine Dancers are pretty irritating, the rest of the enemy menagerie is excellent. These guys are called the Visitors, and they're essentially just dark spirits that you've got to banish wherever you find them. Character designer Reiko Hiroshima got inspiration from old ukiyo Japanese woodblock prints of yokai. And of course, because this is Tango that we're talking about here, we gotta get those Onryo, or women in white with black hair over their faces, as we did with Laura, the Anima, and the Guardian from the Evil Within series. The sheer variety of distinct looks and behaviors for these guys is outstanding. We've got slender men with umbrellas, fat slender men with umbrellas, fat slender? Never mind. And these guys block your attacks and take tons of damage. Big red umbrella dudes who take a beating or who come after you with a hammer. Terrifying scissor hand women who are inspired by Chimera's own nightmares. Headless schoolgirls. Several floating ghosts draped in cloth. Even a giant wedding dress monster named a Shiramuku, and mermaids who can go below the street and sneak attack you, and the list goes on. Combat looks great oftentimes, and when you're dodging fiery orbs or hammer strikes, you really feel like you're in a one-of-a-kind world. And for a time, combat feels pretty good, if simple to execute. Each of your kills nets you experience points to level up all your ability trees, so you can add more damage or different varieties of attacks, make your glide last longer, or net yourself more slots for bracelets which buff your abilities. It's nothing exciting per se, but it is a fun incentive to keep grinding, and it meaningfully changes gameplay. Unfortunately, grinding is a big part of unlocking most of the best stuff, and you'll often be very much done with the game before you get anywhere near a critical mass of all these cool abilities. And the game's difficulty is rarely balanced in such a way that it rewards you for using all of these things in an interesting way. The story is just not very long, the boss fights are few and far between and often stupidly easy, and you run out of scripted side missions pretty quickly too. Now, if that sounds like a very long time to just be zipping around doing mostly the same thing, it very much can be. John Johannes' direction of The Evil Within 2 felt very much like it was being made as an apology tour to the Western market for the rigidity and difficulty of the first game, making it much simpler to control, much more Hollywood-esque in its storytelling, just more accessible overall. In a similar way, Tango has, despite all their Japanese stylings, leaned into some of the worst aspects of Western game development in the past decade. As nice as the open world can look, it can also feel a bit barren, as enemies sparsely populated, there's rarely any music outside of battle, and your list of activities boils down to collecting spirits, collecting trinkets for money, praying at random shrines to level up your guy a little bit, purging gates to unfog the map so you can keep going, and beating up on the occasional band of bad guys. It's not the most exhilarating set of objectives, and even when they can be for a little time, they're often very much the same throughout, with the exception of the platforming to the biggest buildings, which can be kind of a cool, unique challenge. Side missions fare a bit better though, but the truly fun ones are few and far between. Many of them kind of blend together, and it's always like you're talking to some baby-voiced ghost, doing some simple side task to beat up spirits or banish a demon, return to them, and voila, their mundane problem is solved. But true to Tango's style, even when they're bloating out their game a bit, they can't help but do some really atmospheric, fun, and sometimes funny design work. Some of these side missions are just outright stupid and funny, like trying to free up a park bathroom for one spirit by giving the spirit stuck inside the toilet paper that he needs to finish his business. He's having a tough time, let's just say.
I think there's blood.
You've wiped enough.
Other missions are just flat out beautiful and otherworldly, recalling the best supernatural reality warping imagery from the Evil Within series. One mission has you traveling beneath the citio into its metro, where you're taken away by a phantom subway train into another dimension, where you've got to fight waves of bad guys to get back to the real world.
This is definitely no ordinary train station.
Another has you encountering a haunted piano playing Mikami's old favorite, the Moonlight Sonata, and having to purge a jealous ghost from the house in order to make it play right. And another, a dragon painting comes alive and starts flying around the city on flat surfaces, and it must be tracked down and cleansed to return it to its harmless 2D state. And a haunted construction site that travels you back to the times of the samurai. And one of my favorites, the demon parade that crops up in the city square that'll warp you in for a wave-based fight. There's also some really striking imagery on display here, like walking on umbrellas as a giant woman rises up next to you. And because they can't help themselves, Tango also returns to the well that they tapped into with the Evil Within series, with their love of upside-down buildings as seen in Christopher Nolan's Inception. And I can't mention without spoiling too much, the Spider's Thread DLC mission called Fear for the Children. It's set in a haunted school with a particularly terrifying encounter with something that, let's just say, operates on a weeping angel design. It comes out of nowhere and is truly one of the scariest things that I've ever played in a game. Now, I'm saving analysis of this for another video down the road, and I don't want to have to show it to you, so I'll just hype it up and tell you to go experience the fun part for yourself. But yeah, that's the majority of what Ghostwire Tokyo is. Running around the city streets, soaking in the atmosphere, killing some visitors, freeing some spirits, finding some collectibles, doing some side missions, or you can follow the main story, which has some pretty good scripted sequences, although it's mostly remixing the same mechanics you've been practicing in the open world. It's good in small bursts, and it's often a very relaxing game to sift through, but it's understandable why this feels undercooked to many, and why this game's reputation never quite took off. It's unfortunate though, as there is fun to be had here. Part of that fun is the story, which operates much in the same way. It starts off fast and gets you into the action, and it smartly makes you engage with it to unlock new areas in the world before continuing your non-linear grind. And while the story is pretty mediocre for the first couple hours and is uneven throughout, it comes out of nowhere to deliver one of the most emotional endings that I've played through. So let's get right into spoilers and see how it all went down and why this ending hit me at a really important time in my life that made it even more powerful than the first time I experienced it.
So, you coming or what?
That how you ask someone for a favor?
I'm not asking. It's an offer. And neither of us has much choice.
Hope you don't regret it.
So first things first, the acting and the writing are kind of dorky. You'd swear the main character Akito was voiced by Yuri Lowenthal, but he's actually voiced by Corey Yee, who comes off as a fairly annoying straight man protagonist, but gets in some pretty affecting line readings by the end. The spirit that possesses Akito and gives him his power is the recently deceased KK, a ghost hunter who was on the bad guy's trail when this all broke out. He's voiced by the same guy who did Mr. Negative of Spider-Man fame, but he often just sounds kind of hella corny, like an anime dub. The man in the Hanya mask, though, is iconic. There's a reason he's on the cover art, because his vibe is immaculate, and his drip is to die for. I adore his voice performance from Fyodor Chen, whom you may know is my favorite Overwatch characters in Yada, or Yamatao from Ghost of Tsushima.
You're living in your own little world.
That's not how it is. Mari, please, don't leave me like this.
So the game starts out fast, as I said, showing us that Akito is estranged from his sister and she's now dying, and he's feeling guilty about not being closer to her over the years. His pity party's brutally interrupted by Hanya's plan to open up the underworld, and somehow that means he needs to kill everyone in Tokyo and free a bunch of demons upon it. Yeah, I don't know either. He's drawn to Akito's sister Mari, whom we later learn went into a coma trying to retrieve the last memento of she and Akito's dead parents. Her lingering near-death state is what made her powerful as a conduit between worlds, hence Hani's attraction to her and capture of her for his own ends. We have to fight through his powerful minions, which are the reanimated corpses of his own wife and child, and even KK himself at one point. This is a pretty affecting idea, and especially so in the context of how Japanese cultures typically revere the family unit and their deceased ancestors. Making zombies of your family members for your own gain isn't just monstrous in and of itself, but especially so because it reeks of a hatred of the ancient ways, the very lifeblood that gave you existence in the first place. Akito soon learns that KK's own wife and child are out of the city and safe, and he does all of this stuff for them from afar, even in death. Unlike Hanya, who subverts the world for his own ends, KK, despite his mistakes as a father and husband, does the right thing by doing what he can to protect them, and he protects many others as a result. So they're these cool, symbolic mirrors of each other. Unfortunately, the network of ghost hunters that KK worked with in life are only briefly introduced and never really shown on screen, so I'm not sure why they were really introduced. They remind me a lot of the crew that hung out with Desmond in the Assassin's Creed series, even down to this dorky little English guy, and that is not a compliment.
I didn't have all day to wait for you to pick up, so I rigged this phone to ring periodically and play back a recording. No need to talk, just listen to my instructions.
There's nothing special really, this stuff. It's just the stuff that keeps our entire operation from falling apart, really. It requires a great deal of concentration to keep it all moving, so you'll forgive me if I don't have time to play meet and greet.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
We also get some scenes like this that feel ripped out of a screenwriting 101 book where people say the cliches so that you kind of like know what type of scene it's supposed to be. Mari's like, you forgot mom and dad's B-day. Akito's like, no, I'm the kind of guy who can't face stuff, so I'm not going to face this. Wah! And she's like, oh, are you running again? He's like, no!
You don't get it!
Huh, okay guys, good grief. It's TV acting where the lack of subtlety is intentional and it makes the proceedings feel a bit maudlin. But what's so crazy about Ghostwire is that it still manages to direct its cutscenes with creative cinematography and great production value, so it's not like they're cinematically incompetent or just phoning this in. And strangely, the more you sit with the dorkiness and just kind of let it ride, you find that the game's awkwardly fitting pieces still have enough heart to carry the experience into the wildly emotional ending that, while not technically earned, feels right in and of itself. Ghostwire is still dealing with big emotional ideas. Akito and KK's relationship takes a while to resonate, but their lives and values slowly start to mirror each other in powerful ways. Akito comes to grips with ignoring his sister as a young boy, then having to reconnect with her after their parents died, but kind of being unable to face the things that make him feel. KK fights for his estranged family, doing his best to honor them from afar, despite the fact that he thinks they're better off without him, as he's been married to his work for some time. Towards the back end of the story, Akito confronts Hanya as he readies Mari to be used as the conduit to open up the underworld. And Hanya floors Akito with the question of whether Akito's even aware of Mari's own desires, whether she wants to be brought back into the world of the living or put out of her misery.
Have you asked her? Why are you so certain that her spirit wishes to return to this shell?
Akito has no answer to this. It's not so much because he doesn't want to do like a mercy killing or is confused about the sanctity of life. It hits him because he's been so distant for so long, he can't even lie to himself believably about knowing what she would want. But the fact that his lack of knowing still hurts him means he still cares. And as they jump into the vortex caused by Hanya, we run into the classic ghost flashback like you'd see in BioShock. And we see the birth of Mari as a young girl. Akito looking after her, she walks to school and asking her to let him know if she has any trouble there. But then transitioning to his hardening in his teenage years when he seems too cool for her, where he won't call her over and include her in his friends groups. But soon their parents get sick and die. And while circumstances compel them to come back into each other's lives to tidy up their parents' affairs, it's clear that Akito's been mentally distant for a long time, not tending to his relationships with his family. And he's gotten further adrift as each new tragedy has happened.
I guess Mom and Dad finally back together.
Yeah.
But the core of the relationships is still there, one that he used to cherish, one that Akito cannot deny. He's the prodigal son. Prodigal is often thought to mean someone who runs away because of the biblical story, but it actually means specifically someone misusing their time or money in extravagant or wasteful ways, without thought for the future, living in the moment so much that it disrespects the past and destroys the future. The walking sim section where all these scenes play out has no reason to be this affecting. It's generic in a lot of ways. Parental death and abstract terminal illness is commonly used as a tearjerker in cinema. The whole absent from responsibility son angle is fairly cliche as well. But because of Tango's tender treatment of the subject matter, Yanagi's heartrending but hopeful theme yet again sells the whole thing much as it did in Evil Within 2. Yes, it's corny. Yes, it's sentimental, but some things are just corny and sentimental, and you have to face them at some point and embrace them. And Tango manages to make the bones of the story work because they're fundamental truisms, even if they aren't exactly creative storytelling. Tango just knows how to express what loss feels like, how it makes you doubt your goodness as if it were your fault that you couldn't keep someone from dying or leaving. This is also Sebastian's journey in The Evil Within 2, where he learned to forgive himself for what wasn't his fault, like Ruvik and Mobius. And he had to come to terms with the guilt that he felt at his wife and daughter being swept up in the plans of Mobius and feeling unworthy of being loved by them. Ghostwire, though, is more abstractly about forsaking the need to be right, the need to dissociate from the pack in order to make a name for yourself, to be your own man. Akito is to learn teamwork with a grouchy but well-meaning KK who's basically inside of his head, who's doing all of this in death and hopes it'll protect his family as well as the world. In the biblical book of Philippians, Paul admonishes the people he's writing to that they'd be worse than an unbeliever if they didn't provide for their family. A Japanese proverb says that what you owe your father is higher than a mountain, and what you owe your mother is deeper than an ocean. Akito learns this all too well soon. Mari's powers soon manifest, and she drives Hanya back into the void of his own making, and then collapses in Akito's arms. She reveals that she wasn't sick as we assumed, but went into a coma from burns and smoke inhalation when trying to save their last memento of their parents. She passes into the next world full of joy because she could finally meet Akito as they were and pass this memento on to him. His cries of anguish are haunting, but it's taught him a lesson that he ignored all of this time. Don't wait for death to give a damn about life. In a dark mirror of this idea, Hanya emerges from the void he was knocked into, his family's souls technically with him, but sort of melded together with him in this monstrous display.
I have succeeded. I was not mistaken.
He sacrifices the memory and the very bodies of his family to assuage his own suffering because of their deaths. Hanya's life has been stung by the pain of death, and now perpetuates the wound further. But the pain of death for Akito as Mari passes into the afterlife is a reason to change and to believe. This ending hits me very hard. So I meet up with my family once a week to eat and hang out and catch up. And more often than not, this means that one particular member of the family who spends most of their free time looking up conspiracy theories and trying to inject wild claims into the average conversation usually ends up in an argument with me. This has been going on for years. Conversations feel like they're on a timer to go from winsome family fun to something weird and off-kilter and speculative, and also presumptive that anyone else needs to hear or pay attention to this baseless conjecture and entertain it. It's highly frustrating as this person's in their 60s, and instead of building new memories and appreciating old ones with the time that we have left, we're just creating new fights about things this person's never believed in until 3 to 4 years ago and now dogmatically defends. They're immune to logic, and more importantly, we're losing time to idle speculation, to fake pasts and stillborn futures. So to see Akito so sad about the time he's lost to his own selfishness strikes home. It feels viscerally real. As I replayed this game recently, knowing that it had this powerful ending, but I wasn't prepared for how it would hit me once my own family drama had hit its zenith alongside of me playing this game. During that final walking scene, I wept profusely, painfully, hideously, as if my core was the one being ripped out. I lamented the loss of joy, or the pernicious lurking of dangerous thinking and angry dissent that was likely to follow if someone dared to resist the constant suggestion of wild conspiracy and often incredible immorality that suggested as the result and the justification for believing all these conspiracies. Now, I've often heard it said that when you apologize to someone, we need to avoid defending our intentions and apologize for the impact of what we said or did to someone. When we focus on them rationalizing what we did, we're still worried about how we look to them instead of worrying about the impact that we've had on their mental state. Regardless of whether our feelings of fear or disappointment compelled us to make a bad decision, we still made the bad decision. Healing can't just go one way until someone plays by our rules, and then we can start trading them healing, start trying to heal them. Once Akito stops trying to justify himself as the person whom no one understands, despite his lack of expressing his own feelings or being around to nurture his relationship with his family, when he sees the example his parents set played out before him and sees them in the afterlife, their spirits laid to rest, he can finally let Mari go too, being there for her now. Like a deathbed confession, it doesn't matter what came before, but what comes next. As Akito says,
I didn't forget. Of course, I could never forget. Never. I won't keep pretending it doesn't hurt. I'm gonna live. Even if it means feeling weak.
For Akito, we may never find out what that life is like. Despite Ghostwire Tokyo having a planned sequel, very unlikely to ever come out since the rights still remain with Microsoft, but who knows, maybe someday they'll revive the trademark and knock on Tango's door and ask them to revisit their extremely special series that feels like it's just at the beginning of its potential, not even close to reaching all the heights that it promises. But regardless, whether we ever see anything from these guys again, we do know that Akito as a character is starting out on the right foot from here on out. So I hope to follow his lead as I come to terms with my own frustrations in my family life, trying to navigate my own decorum as I try to be firm but also kind, and how I deal with an unreasonable person who's getting in the way of better times that we could build together and that we want to build together. In this season of celebration, when we're going to see our families and probably run into a few people we have a problem with, just be kind and long-suffering. Don't let election results or pride or distaste ruin the proceedings. So many of these people you'll wish you'd redeem the time with when they're gone, and it will leave a black mark of guilt and shame if you let their bad behavior drag you down into the mud with them. Keep your nose clean and don't give up. Love is patient, life is short, and life is worth living, even if it means feeling weak from time to time. As KK said,
tell them I never gave up. Not for a moment.
I will. I promise.
Hey, sorry to dump that on you. I'd do it myself if I could, but I'm getting a little tired.
See you later. Next time we meet, I'll have lived a good, full life. Okay?
Thanks for watching. Before I go, I'd like to give a huge shout out to those of you generous enough to support my work by becoming a patron. Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Hey Blondie, Hey Aksho, M, Bibi F. and Bloxburg, and Melancholy Geek. And an extra special thank you to those of you donating at my highest paid tiers, The Nth Review and James Wyatt. Now, if you'd like to keep what few lights I have on, you should join these folks at patreon.com/Midnight Medium, or become a YouTube channel member, or buy me a coffee and donate at PayPal. Also, check out my GOG and NordVPN affiliate links to support me with no extra cost to you. And if you aren't tired of me yet, check me out as I join Deadforge and Robert Yap in the Quad Damage podcast, where we talk first-person shooters with developers and content creators alike. God bless you, everyone, and I'll see you soon.